The twin suns shone brightly over the vast desert battlefield of Corin 5. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground was covered in fine golden dust. It was a place where warriors from different species clashed to prove their strength. Among them stood Vela, a young warrior from the Valari race. The Valari were known for their tall, lean bodies, quick reflexes, and natural fighting skills. They believed in using their own strength and speed, rather than relying on weapons or armor. Vela, with her purple skin and sharp golden eyes, was proud of her heritage. She had trained since childhood to become a great warrior. As she stood on the training grounds, she spotted a group of human soldiers preparing for combat practice. Among them was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a heavy suit of black armor. His helmet covered his face, and his armor made him look more like a machine than a warrior. Vela smirked. "Look at them," she whispered to one of her fellow Valari warriors, hiding inside their metal shells. "Are they even strong without them?" Her friend chuckled, but none of the humans seemed to hear her, except for one. The armored man turned his head slightly. Then, without a word, he stepped forward. The ground trembled slightly under his heavy boots. As he approached, the other human soldiers gave him space, as if they knew something was about to happen. Vela crossed her arms, unimpressed. "So, the metal man wants to say something." The man's helmet slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a strong face with deep brown eyes. He had short, dark hair and a calm expression. His gaze met Vela's with quiet confidence. "My name is Greg," he said simply, "and this armor isn't what makes me strong." Vela raised an eyebrow. "Oh, then why do you need it?" She tapped her own bare arm, showing her natural strength. "My people fight with skill and speed. We don't need heavy armor slowing us down." Greg didn't look offended. Instead, he studied her carefully. "Armor protects, but it doesn't fight for me." He glanced at the Valari warriors around her. "Your people are fast, I've heard, but strength is more than speed." Vela laughed. "Prove it." She pointed at the open training ground. "Face me in combat, but don't hide behind your metal shell." A few nearby warriors turned to watch, interested in the challenge. Some of the human soldiers exchanged glances, but Greg remained calm. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." Vela grinned, thinking she had already won. She had fought many warriors before, and none had been able to match her speed. Without his armor, Greg would be no different. As they walked to the center of the training ground, Vela stretched her arms and legs, preparing for an easy victory. Greg, on the other hand, reached up and began removing his armor, piece by piece. First, he unlatched his chest plate, setting it aside. Then he removed the armored gauntlets from his hands, followed by the heavy boots and leg guards. The more he removed, the more surprised Vela became. She had expected to see a weak, fragile human beneath all that metal. But instead, Greg's body was lean and strong, with powerful muscles built from years of training. His movements were smooth, controlled. Even without the armor, he looked like a warrior. Vela's smirk faded slightly. Greg stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders. "Ready when you are." For the first time, Vela felt uncertain. But she quickly pushed the thought away. It didn't matter how he looked. He was still human, and no human had ever been able to match a Valari in speed. The training ground fell silent as the duel was about to begin. Would Greg prove her wrong? The air was thick with tension as Vela and Greg faced each other in the training ground. A small crowd of warriors, both human and Valari, gathered around to watch. The twin suns above cast long shadows, making the scene even more dramatic. Vela shifted her stance, her sharp golden eyes locked on Greg. She had fought many warriors before, some fast, some strong, but none had ever truly challenged her. She was sure this would be no different. Greg, now without his armor, stood calmly. His posture was relaxed but firm. His brown eyes didn't hold arrogance, only quiet confidence. He had accepted this challenge, and now he was ready. A Valari warrior on the sidelines raised his hand. Begin. Vela moved instantly. She was fast, faster than any human should be able to react to. Her body blurred as she dashed to Greg's side, aiming to strike his ribs with a quick punch. But Greg moved too. At the last second, he twisted his body, dodging her strike with ease. Vela's fist hit nothing but air. She blinked in surprise. Before she could recover, Greg shifted his weight and countered with a simple, precise movement. He extended his arm, tapping her shoulder just enough to push her off balance. Vela stumbled back a step. The watching crowd murmured. Vela clenched her fists. "Lucky move," she muttered, regaining her footing. Greg said nothing. He simply watched her, waiting. This time, she wouldn't give him a chance to react. She dashed forward again, faster than before, launching a series of rapid strikes aimed at his chest, shoulders, and legs. Greg moved with surprising agility. He dodged left, stepped back, blocked with his forearm, every movement controlled and efficient. He wasn't just fast. He was reading her attacks, predicting them. Vela growled in frustration. No one had ever avoided her strikes like this. She was the fastest of her generation. Yet this human, without armor, was matching her step for step. She needed to change tactics. Jumping back, she took a deep breath and then lunged forward again. But this time, she feinted. She acted as if she was going to punch his right side, but shifted at the last second, aiming a powerful kick at his left leg. Greg saw through it. The moment her leg moved, he reacted with perfect timing. He twisted his body and caught her ankle midair. Then, with a controlled motion, he guided her momentum, making her lose balance. Vela gasped as she hit the ground, landing on her back. The crowd fell silent. For the first time in her life, Vela was the one who had been outmaneuvered. Greg took a step back, offering his hand. "Want to go again?" he asked casually. Vela's pride burned inside her, but at the same time, she felt something else. Excitement. No one had ever given her a true challenge like this before. She grabbed his hand and pulled herself up. Her golden eyes glowed with determination. This fight wasn't over yet. Vela stood up, brushing the dust off her arms. Her heart pounded, but not from exhaustion, from excitement. Never had she faced someone like this before. Greg was different. He wasn't just reacting to her attacks. He was thinking, adapting. The crowd around them whispered among themselves. Some Valari warriors looked confused, others intrigued. The humans watching had small smiles on their faces, as if they had expected Greg to hold his own. Vela smirked. "All right, human. That was impressive." She cracked her knuckles. "But I'm not done yet." Greg gave a small nod, his face calm. "I didn't think you were." This time, Vela decided to change her approach. She had always relied on speed, but speed alone wasn't working against Greg. He was reading her moves too well. She needed to be unpredictable. She took a slow step forward, circling him. Greg didn't move, but his eyes followed her carefully. Then, without warning, she lunged. But not toward him. She feinted left, then jumped high, twisting her body midair to attack from above. Most warriors would have trouble dodging an aerial strike, but Greg reacted instantly. Instead of stepping back, he did something completely unexpected. He stepped forward. As Vela came down, expecting to land her strike, she suddenly found herself caught. Greg had moved right into her attack zone, reaching out and grabbing her wrist before her strike could land. His grip was firm but not painful. He had calculated the perfect spot to intercept her move. Vela gasped in shock. No one had ever countered her like this before. Using the momentum of her own attack, Greg shifted his weight and guided her down, not with force, but with control. Instead of hitting him, Vela found herself spinning and landing on her feet beside him. The crowd murmured in amazement. Greg let go of her wrist immediately, stepping back. "You're fast," he admitted, "but speed alone isn't enough." Vela turned to face him, her golden eyes blazing. "You're toying with me." Greg shook his head. "No, I'm showing you something." Vela clenched her fists. She was one of the best fighters among her people. She had trained since childhood, mastering every combat technique. And yet this human, who had removed his armor, was not only matching her, but teaching her something new. For the first time, she felt something strange. Respect. She took a deep breath, calming herself. Then she nodded. "All right. Show me more." Greg gave a small smile. "Then let's keep going." The fight wasn't over. But this time, Vela wasn't just fighting to win. She was fighting to learn. Vela took a deep breath, her muscles tense but steady. She had never faced an opponent like Greg before. His fighting style was different. Calm, precise, and strategic. He didn't rely on speed alone like the Valari, nor on brute force like some other species. He combined skill, patience, and intelligence. She circled him again, her sharp golden eyes watching every movement. Greg stood in a relaxed stance, his hands open, his breathing steady. He was ready for whatever she would try next. The crowd around them remained silent, their curiosity growing. The Valari warriors were not used to seeing one of their own struggle in combat, especially against a human without armor. Vela's pride burned, but she pushed it aside. She needed to focus. This wasn't just about proving herself. It was about understanding why Greg was different. She dashed forward suddenly, aiming a low sweep at his legs. If she could knock him off balance, she could gain control of the fight. But Greg moved smoothly, stepping over her leg with ease. He was light on his feet, almost as fast as her. Vela didn't stop. She twisted her body, spinning upward into a high kick. Greg raised his arm, blocking her attack with perfect timing. She felt the impact, but he barely flinched. Vela landed on her feet again, frustrated but impressed. "You're good," she admitted. Greg nodded. "You're fast. But speed isn't enough if your opponent knows how to use it against you." Vela narrowed her eyes. "Then let's see how you handle this." She charged again, but this time, she didn't aim for a direct hit. She tested him, throwing small, quick strikes, watching how he reacted. Greg moved efficiently, blocking and dodging with minimal effort. He never wasted energy, never overextended. Vela was starting to see it now. He wasn't just reacting. He was reading her, studying her patterns. He had already memorized how she moved, and now he was predicting her next steps. She needed to change her strategy. Instead of attacking, she suddenly stopped. She stood still, breathing steadily, watching him. Greg also stopped, tilting his head slightly. "You're learning," he said. Vela smirked. "Maybe." She shifted her stance, relaxing her body. Then, in an instant, she launched forward. But this time, she didn't follow a pattern. She moved unpredictably, changing directions mid-strike, attacking from angles he wouldn't expect. Greg's eyes sharpened. He adjusted quickly, but Vela could see the difference. He wasn't as comfortable now. She had broken the rhythm. She pressed forward, forcing him to move defensively. For the first time, she saw him take a small step back. The crowd gasped. Vela grinned. "Got you." Greg smiled slightly. "Almost." Before she could celebrate, Greg suddenly shifted his weight, twisting his body in a way she didn't expect. In one swift motion, he redirected her attack, using her own momentum to guide her forward. She stumbled, but caught herself just in time. She turned back to him, breathing hard. Greg lowered his hand slightly. "That was better. You're adapting." Vela stared at him, then laughed. "So are you." Greg nodded. "That's how humans fight. We learn, we adjust, we improve." Vela felt something change inside her. This was no longer about proving who was stronger. It was about understanding something new. She looked around at the watching warriors, then back at Greg. "I want to keep going," she said, determination in her voice. Greg smiled. "Then let's keep going." The duel wasn't over yet. Vela's heart pounded as she took her stance again. She had fought many warriors before, but Greg was different. He wasn't just strong, he was smart. He adapted quickly, learning from every move she made. And now she was doing the same. The crowd around them watched in silence, their eyes fixed on the two fighters. The Valari warriors looked uneasy. They had expected Vela to win easily, but now they weren't so sure. Greg rolled his shoulders, his stance still relaxed. "Ready?" he asked. Vela smirked. "Always." She moved first, but this time she didn't go for speed. She had learned that speed alone wouldn't work against Greg. Instead, she used controlled movements, mixing slow and fast strikes to confuse him. Greg adjusted quickly, blocking and dodging, but she could see the small changes in his expression. He was thinking harder now, working to predict her. She didn't let him. At the last second, she twisted her body and dropped low, sweeping her leg in a move that forced him to jump back. She followed instantly, closing the distance before he could fully recover. For the first time, she landed a clean hit. Her palm struck his chest, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to push him back a step. The crowd gasped. Greg exhaled, rubbing his chest. Then, to Vela's surprise, he grinned. "Nice one." Vela crossed her arms. "Took me long enough." Greg nodded. "You broke the pattern. That's good." Vela tilted her head. "Is that how humans always fight? Always thinking, always adjusting?" Greg smiled slightly. "It's how we survive." Vela's eyes narrowed. She had always believed that strength was everything. But Greg was showing her something new. Strength isn't just power. It's the ability to change, to learn, to grow. She had never fought like this before, and she was enjoying every second of it. "All right, human," she said, rolling her shoulders. "Let's see what else you've got." Greg chuckled. "You asked for it." He moved fast, faster than before. Vela barely had time to react as he closed the gap, using her own techniques against her. He mixed his attacks, shifting between speed and patience, forcing her to stay on her toes. She blocked one strike, dodged another, but then, tap. Greg's fingers lightly touched her shoulder, just as she had touched his chest moments ago. Vela froze. She had been outplayed again. The crowd murmured in shock. Greg stepped back, lowering his hands. "Looks like we're even." Vela stared at him, then threw her head back and laughed. The sound surprised the onlookers. They had never seen Vela enjoy a fight like this. She looked at Greg, a new kind of respect in her eyes. "You're good, human." Greg smiled. "So are you." Vela took a deep breath, feeling the excitement rush through her. This wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a lesson. And she was ready to learn more. The tension in the air had changed. What started as a simple match between a human and a Valari warrior had now become something more. The crowd sensed it. This was no longer about victory or proving who was stronger. It was about understanding. Vela wiped sweat from her brow, her golden eyes never leaving Greg. She had fought many warriors before, but none had challenged her in this way. He was unpredictable, patient, and adaptive. Everything a true warrior should be. Greg stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders. "You still want to continue?" he asked, a small smile on his face. Vela smirked. "Do you?" Greg chuckled. "All right then." They circled each other again. This time, neither rushed in. Both had learned. Both had adapted. Now, it was about precision. Vela made the first move. She feinted left, testing his reaction. Greg shifted his weight slightly, preparing for a counter. She didn't attack. Instead, she stepped back, forcing him to make the next move. Greg hesitated for a brief moment, just as she had learned from him. Now he had to learn from her. Then he moved. He stepped forward with a quick strike, aiming for her side. Vela dodged, but he was already adjusting, twisting his body to follow up with another attack. Vela barely blocked it in time. Their arms locked for a brief second, muscles tensed. Greg grinned. Not bad. Vela smirked. Not bad yourself. She pushed back, breaking the lock, and leaped to the side, creating distance. The fight continued, but now there was something different in their movements. A rhythm. They weren't just fighting. They were dancing. Attack, counter, dodge, strike. It was a perfect balance of offense and defense, each pushing the other to their limits. The crowd had fallen completely silent. No one had expected this. Vela's breathing was heavy, but she felt alive. Every movement, every reaction, it all made sense now. This was what true combat was. Not just power, not just speed, but growth. Greg finally took a step back, raising a hand. I think that's enough for today. Vela blinked, surprised. Giving up. Greg shook his head. No, but fighting without purpose is just wasted energy. Vela stared at him, then slowly nodded. She understood. This match had already given them both something more valuable than victory. Respect. She extended her hand. You're a strange warrior, Greg. Greg smiled and shook her hand. And you're a strong one, Vela. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Valari warriors were not known for showing respect to outsiders, but Vela didn't care. She had learned something new today, and she had found a warrior truly worth fighting. The arena remained silent for a long moment after the fight ended. The Valari warriors watched with unreadable expressions, while the human observers exchanged knowing glances. This match had not been just another test of strength. It had become something deeper. Vela still felt the energy of the battle coursing through her veins. Her body was tired, her muscles ached, but her mind was sharper than ever. She had never fought like this before, had never learned like this before. Greg had shown her something new, something beyond raw power. Greg, standing before her with an easy smile, looked completely calm. He had fought her without armor, without advanced weapons, and yet he had held his ground. Not by being stronger, but by thinking ahead, by adapting. Vela exhaled, stepping closer to him. You fight differently, Greg. I've never faced anyone like you. Greg nodded, wiping a bit of sweat from his brow. Same here. You're faster than anyone I've fought before. There was no arrogance in his voice, no need to declare victory. Just honesty. The Valari warriors shifted uneasily. One of them, a tall male named Oran, stepped forward. His expression was serious as he looked between Vela and Greg. Vela, Oran said, his voice firm. This was supposed to be a test of strength, not whatever this was. Vela crossed her arms. And what was this, Oran? Oran hesitated. A lesson. Greg chuckled. That sounds about right. Vela turned back to Greg, tilting her head. Tell me something, human. When you fight, do you always think like this? Always adjusting, always changing? Greg shrugged. That's how humans survive. We don't always have the strongest bodies, so we use our minds. We learn from every battle. Vela considered his words. The Valari had always believed in strength above all else. But Greg had proven that strength wasn't just about power, it was about knowing how to use it. Oran folded his arms. So you admit that humans are weaker? Greg raised an eyebrow. Weaker? No. Different? Yes. He gestured toward Vela. She's stronger than me, no doubt. Faster too. But strength without strategy can be beaten. And strategy without strength is useless. The best warriors know how to use both. Vela smiled slightly. That's why you took off your armor, isn't it? To prove that strength isn't just about protection. Greg nodded. Armor is useful, but it's not everything. The Valari warriors murmured among themselves. This was not a lesson they were used to hearing. Vela looked at them, then back at Greg. You've given me something to think about, human. Greg grinned, glad to hear it. She extended her arm toward him, this time not for combat, but in respect. Next time, I won't hold back. Greg clasped her forearm firmly. Neither will I. The match was over. But something told Vela that this was only the beginning. The match was over, but the effects of the battle remained. The Valari warriors whispered among themselves, exchanging uncertain glances. They had never seen one of their own, especially Vela, treat an outsider with such respect. Vela still felt the rush of the fight, the lesson she had learned from Greg circling in her mind. She had always believed that strength alone decided victory, but now she knew better. Strength was important, but so was intelligence, patience, and the ability to adapt. Greg stood nearby, his arms crossed, observing the reactions of the Valari warriors. He had sensed from the beginning that this match was about more than just proving himself. It was about understanding each other's way of fighting, and in a larger sense, their way of thinking. Oran, still looking doubtful, took a step forward. Vela, are you saying this human is equal to us? Vela met his gaze firmly. I'm saying he's different. And sometimes, different is stronger than we expect. Oran scoffed. You speak as if we should learn from him. Vela smirked. Maybe we should. The crowd murmured again, some in agreement, others in disbelief. The Valari were a proud people, known across the galaxy as warriors. To admit they could learn from a human was not an easy idea to accept. Greg, sensing the tension, shrugged. Look, I didn't come here to challenge your traditions. But if you think learning from an opponent is weakness, you're making a mistake. Oran narrowed his eyes. And what would you have us learn, human? Greg glanced at Vela, then back at Oran. That fighting isn't just about who's strongest. It's about who can think faster, adapt better, and keep learning. If you believe strength alone wins battles, you'll lose to someone who knows how to use their mind. Oran frowned, but he couldn't deny what he had seen. Greg had fought without armor, without advanced weapons, and yet he had stood toe-to-toe with Vela, one of the best warriors among them. Vela took a deep breath and stepped forward. Then let's test it. Greg raised an eyebrow. Test what? Vela turned to the gathered warriors. Greg fought me one-on-one, and we both learned from each other. But real battles aren't fought alone. Oran crossed his arms. What are you suggesting? Vela's smirk widened. A team challenge. 2 teams, one led by me, one by Greg. We'll see if his ideas work not just in a duel, but in a real fight. The warriors reacted with surprise. A team challenge was not something they had expected, but it was an idea they couldn't ignore. Greg chuckled. You just can't let me rest, can you? Vela grinned. You started this, human. Let's see if you can finish it. Greg thought for a moment, then nodded. All right, let's do it. The next battle wouldn't be about individuals. It would be about strategy, teamwork, and proving that the strongest warriors weren't just the ones with the most power, but the ones who knew how to use it. The training ground was set. The Valari warriors gathered in a large open field surrounded by jagged stone pillars. This was their testing ground, a place where warriors honed their skills and prepared for real combat. Vela stood at one end, her team of Valari warriors lined up behind her. She had chosen some of the best fighters, strong, fast, and disciplined. On the other side, Greg stood with his own team. He had picked warriors who weren't just strong, but also willing to adapt. Some of them looked uncertain, as if they weren't sure they should be taking orders from a human. The challenge was simple. Each team had to capture the opposing team's flag from their side of the battlefield. The first team to return the flag to their starting point would win. Oran, acting as the judge, raised his arm. On my mark, begin. The moment his arm dropped, Vela's team charged forward. They moved as one, fast and powerful, using their strength to overwhelm anyone in their way. Greg, however, didn't move immediately. Instead, he watched, calculating. Then he gave a simple command. Spread out. His team quickly separated into smaller groups, avoiding a direct clash with Vela's force. Instead of fighting head-on, they moved in different directions, forcing Vela's warriors to split up. Vela narrowed her eyes. She had expected Greg to engage directly, but he was already using the different approach. She signaled two of her best fighters to push forward. They rushed toward Greg's side, confident that their strength would allow them to break through. Greg, seeing them approach, nodded to one of his teammates. "Lead them away. Make them chase you." The chosen warrior sprinted off to the side, making it look like he was protecting something valuable. The two Valari warriors took the bait and followed, leaving a gap in Vela's defense. Greg's second group immediately took advantage of it, slipping through unnoticed. Vela clicked her tongue in frustration. Greg wasn't fighting them. He was maneuvering them. She turned to her remaining fighters. "Don't chase. Hold your ground." But the damage had already been done. Greg's team had made it past their defenses and was closing in on the flag. Vela had to act fast. She sprinted toward the flag herself, determined to protect it. Greg saw her coming and smiled. "All right, time to see how well you've learned." Vela reached the flag just as Greg did. They stood face to face, breathing heavily, the energy of the battle between them. "No tricks this time, Greg," Vela said. Greg smirked. "No tricks, just skill." They clashed, exchanging rapid blows. This time, there was no hesitation. Both of them had learned from their last fight. Vela was faster, but Greg was precise, dodging just enough to avoid a full impact while positioning himself for counters. Vela swept her leg out, aiming to trip him. Greg saw it coming and jumped back, but she had already moved in again, keeping him from gaining ground. "You're improving," Greg said between breaths. "You too," Vela admitted. But Greg wasn't just fighting, he was stalling. While Vela was focused on him, another one of Greg's teammates had already grabbed the flag. By the time she realized it, they were running back toward their starting point. Vela's eyes widened. "You tricked me again." Greg grinned. "Told you. Strength and strategy." Vela didn't hesitate. She bolted after the flag runner, pushing her speed to the limit. She was gaining ground fast, ready to intercept. But then, one of Greg's teammates stepped in her path, blocking her just long enough for the flag runner to cross the finish line. The signal horn blew. The match was over. Greg's team had won. The battlefield fell silent for a moment before the Valari warriors murmured among themselves. They had seen it with their own eyes. Greg hadn't won through brute force. He had won through planning, through teamwork, through thinking. Oran walked forward, looking at Greg with something new in his eyes. Not doubt, not disbelief. Respect. Vela stood next to Greg, still breathing heavily. But then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Greg blinked, didn't expect that reaction. Vela smirked. "I lost. But I learned, and that makes me stronger." Greg nodded. "Then I guess we both won." Oren stepped forward. "I think we all learned something today." The Valari warriors nodded in agreement. This match had changed something. Their view of strength had shifted. Vela turned to Greg, extending her arm. "You were right, human. Strength isn't just about power. It's about how you use it." Greg clasped her forearm. "Glad you finally see it." The battle was over, but something greater had begun. The Valari had gained a new respect for humans, and Vela had gained a new rival, one she looked forward to facing again. Maybe next time, she would win.